Hey everyone, Margie Walden here again on Valentine's Day, and today I'm going to go over some basic shooting fundamentals. And so, once again, before I begin the training, I like to start off with a quick prayer and acknowledge God and just say, thank you, Lord, for blessing us with this wonderful, beautiful day and allowing us this opportunity to train. We ask that you bless and keep us and our loved ones safe, and we ask that you bless us with the necessary skills that are needed to protect ourselves and loved ones if the need should ever arise, but we pray that it never does. In your holy name we pray, amen. So now I want to talk about some basic marksmanship fundamentals. So what are those? It's basically just learning how to shoot, right? So this is going to be a basic shooting lesson. And so the first thing we're going to start off again, just re-owning those universal safety rules, and that is remember to treat all firearms as if they're loaded. Maintaining that good trigger and muzzle discipline. So keeping your finger off the trigger until you're on sight and ready to shoot, and then muzzle discipline, keeping that gun pointed in a safe direction, and knowing your target and what's beyond it. And then also not dropping a firearm. If you were to drop one, let it fall. Don't try to catch a falling firearm. So that being said, I'm dealing with SIRT pistols here today, but nonetheless I'm going to treat them kind of with regards to being live. We've got a brick wall over here that I'll be pointing the gun towards, and so that'll be our safe zone or our safe area. And so we want to start off with, the first thing we want to do is establish a good grip. And so what does that look like? You're going to take for me, I'm right-handed, so your strong hand. If you're left-handed, it'll be your left hand. And the web of your hand here, you want that high into the, they call this a beaver tail or dovetail of the firearm. So you want that nice and high. I see a lot of people, they come down here and they grab the gun like so. You want to get a nice high grip with that gun. And you want to wrap your other fingers equally around. Again, we have another wall over on this side, so, and it's going to look like this from the left side. So you want this middle finger high up underneath that trigger guard, and we'll bring that in a little bit closer so that you can see what that looks like. And then you're going to wrap your offhand. For me, that's my left. For right-handed shooters, that's going to be your right. Equally, again, this index finger should kind of come up and be resting or touching on that trigger guard, and then you want to get this hand equally like so, and so it looks like that from the top. My index finger, my trigger finger, if you notice, is nice and high, as is both of my thumbs on this gun, right? So where the index finger and where that thumb goes is pretty much where that muzzle is going to go, right? And so that's what it's going to look like from the opposite side. This is what it's going to look like from this side. And so grip. Grip can be affected. I see a lot of people, they try to do this crisscross thing with their thumbs. And if you do that without holding a gun, you're going to notice that that's going to kind of wedge the bottom part of your hands a little bit away from the gun. And so that means you're not holding full contact with that pressure. And so you want as much pressure as you can on the pistol grip. The more contact you have with the gun, the more you're going to manage that recoil, and the less opportunity for energy is going to be to escape. And so how can you help that? Kind of think of your hands as like a vice grip, right? Push these elbows kind of in and downward, right? Tuck those in. So I see a lot of people doing this, and I'm like, how are you getting I mean, I guess you could, but get those elbows in and tucked, and then that's what a nice solid grip looks like. If you get this grip down well, you're going to be able to run that gun, and you'll see it'll run like a machine. It's not going to be doing this all kinds of craziness. And you can watch and video yourself at the range by practicing the grip. Grip is so crucial that if I had the perfect solid grip on the gun, all the other trigger fundamental wouldn't really matter so much, because I could bounce off that trigger all day long. If I'm managing my grip so solid, it's not really going to matter how I manipulate that trigger, right? But most people don't have that perfect grip established, so we still got to work on those other fundamentals. And what is that? So you have your grip, then you have your trigger control. So for me, my right index finger is going to be my trigger finger. and you want just about the pad of your index finger on that trigger. And again, so this matters when you're sizing up and you're selecting your firearm, right? Where does your finger fall within that gun? And so trigger placement is kind of crucial, but I've seen some people, they've adapted over that with the smaller guns. But at the end of the day, you want that just the pad of the index finger on that trigger, and it's gonna look like so. You can get a good look at that. So not way back here, not too much, you're not hooking the trigger. Just nice solid owning that trigger and straight through trigger control. That's the other thing. So although I tell you to keep your finger off the trigger until you're on sight and ready to shoot, the last thing I want you to do is take your finger off the trigger when you're shooting. If you're shooting, keep your finger on the trigger. If I could super glue your finger to the trigger while you're shooting, I would, because what I see a lot of people do is they'll pull off a really good shot, so they'll squeeze that trigger, and then all of a sudden, bam, they let go of it really sloppy. You don't want to do that. You want follow through, just like any other sport, like golf or baseball. So when you squeeze that trigger, you want to squeeze, hold it to the rear, and release, and own that through the whole process. If you're doing that properly, what'll end up happening is you'll feel that trigger reset. So unless your gun's like really tripped out for competition grade, there's usually a little bit of slop traveling beyond where that trigger break is. And so when you squeeze that trigger back, and how I learned to manage trigger control is I used to say to myself, slow, steady squeeze, slow, steady release. I like brainwash myself into doing that. And I don't mean slow and steady in the manner that you're milking the trigger out, but a slow, consistent squeeze straight to the rear. And I actually held it to the rear for a minute. Then I let it go because it was like as sloppy as I wanted, until I learned to manage that really well. And so you can do a rubber band, like one of those thicker rubber bands, and learn to get that muscle memory down with that trigger control. And that will help with regards to your trigger control. Stance is another thing. So again, for marksmanship, getting that perfect stance down, that helps, right? Bullseye shooters, you see them all day long, they build that perfect foundation, and it definitely matters and comes into play. But with regards to defensive shooting, again, that's where we're gonna kind of stick with defensive in our videos. You have a couple different stances. So you've got one, they call it the Weaver stance, and basically your feet are about 45-degree angle, about shoulder width apart. I always tell everybody, jump up, and kind of where you land, that's where your feet fit naturally, kind of at a shoulder width apart. It's not like this. My friend Joel always explains it as a volleyball stance, and I kind of like that too. So not real wide, and it's not real narrow. It's just a nice balance, right? So with regards to the Weaver stance, my left foot, because I'm right-handed, is going to be down and pointed somewhat at my target, a little bit off, not dead on. And again, feet about 45-degree or shoulder width apart, kind of at about a 45-degree angle. This back foot is almost straight. You can't see it on the ground, but it's almost level like this. And my front foot's just slightly angled at my target. You're going to bring the firearm up, and you'll have a slight break in this arm here, in my left arm, and a little bit of a break in this arm, and it looks pretty much like that, right? Nice, kind of relaxed. Some people shoot like that, and they shoot like that well. And I shot like that for years, and I've shot effectively, efficiently, and well like that. I do a little bit of a modified still. That's just kind of my comfort, where I've done it for over 25 years, so that's how I shoot. But for defensive shooting, if you're just getting started, the ideal is to go to what they call an isosceles. So an isosceles, both feet are about shoulder width apart. So again, jump up where you land naturally, comfortably. You're gonna kind of tuck that butt like that volleyball stance, and your arms are gonna come out and they're going to formulate a triangle. So that's where it gets the name. So it forms like an isosceles triangle, straight out, right? And you're gonna kind of lean into it. I see a lot of people shoot like this and they're back here like this, because I mean, yes, there's a little bit of recoil going on here, but it's not anything that's going to destroy you. So lean into it. And another way that I can demonstrate things is what I'll do is I'll take these SIRT pistols, or I'll have one of my rubber guns in the class, and I'll have students stand here like this, and then I will go up and I will push on this gun, and they're off balance, right? And when I have them just lean into it just slightly, then they're like, I go up and I push on that gun, and then they're like more solid of a stance. It's gonna help you manage recoil a little bit better. So your stance matters. Then they have like a Chapman stance, and it's more of I kind of do like a modified Weaver Chapman, where your left hand, in my case, your offhand, is going to be like closer in to your body. So I'm almost using my body as support, and it's a little bit closer to me. It's a little bit close quarters, right? And so I think the mindset when it was taught to me was that if you're clearing buildings or you're going in, that you have better weapons retention with the gun like so. So again, ideally for defensive shooting, it should be isosceles. However, if you've always shot Weaver like I have, and you're good at it and you're accurate at it, some people will argue that there's cam footage out there from cops that indicates that, regardless of how they were trained, they went to this under a critical incident. Well, that's fine, but when we use cops as the indicator, I would argue that most police officers shoot maybe 2 or 3 times a year, depending on their budget, right? And they're not usually shooting much beyond that when they leave work, because they go home and they don't want to be cop. They want to be family man and friend and lover and all of those other things, and a normal person. So they're not out there always copping it up. And so there are some that shoot, and I'm not saying that all cops can't shoot, but I'm just saying they're not doing the homework and the repetitions and the muscle memory, and like some of us have. I've shot thousands and thousands of rounds. I know what I do, and it's natural for me to do this. I've worked in a prison. My body alarm was here. It's natural for me to take that interview stance back. I've done it in my mind mentally. I've done it over and over shooting, so it's more comfortable. It was almost trying to break a habit for me to get me to do the isosceles. It was different than this because they're trying to break me of a habit that I've developed over many years during this defensive class, and it just wasn't my thing. And so it's still not. But some people, I try it both ways. I practice, don't get me wrong. So get out there and try and see how accurately you shoot with both. But mine is typically a little bit of a modified Weaver Chapman kind of stance. I do well with it. That's what works for me. So remember, if somebody's giving you advice, take it and practice it. Don't just be a Kool-Aid drinker. Get out there and see what works for you and see, hey, do I like this better? Am I more accurate like this? Now, again, so there's evidence to indicate that under critical incidents that so many, 100 and some police officers that have been interviewed, because they've got most of the cam footage, right? And that's how we're utilizing a lot of this visual aids and discovering a lot of these things, that although they were taught perhaps maybe a Weaver stance, they find that in a critical incident, this is what they're doing. And so what does that mean? They're straight on, they're squared up with their target, right? And some of those things. So just think about what you're doing, when you're doing it, why you're doing it. And if you're in the early phases, I would probably recommend doing that isosceles. But if you've done it wrong or a different way for many years, stick with what you know. If you're good at it and that's what works, keep pushing at it and keep doing it. So that being said, we talked about stance, we talked about grip, we talked about trigger control, and the other thing is that's not often talked about is breathing. So I'm going to over exaggerate this, but if you're breathing while you're shooting, be consistent and pause your breath and say, so either do that consistently on inhale, consistently on exhale, or halfway, whatever you're going to look like. And I'm going to over exaggerate it, but if I breathe on inhale, the gun's going to be here. On exhale, here, down, right? So breathing while shooting affects your shot group. It's going to affect your elevation, so up and down on your shot patterns. For defensive shooting, again, what are you likely going to be doing? You're probably going to be heavy breathing because you're under attack, right? So breathing is one of the fundamentals that's really not talked about in defensive shooting, but it's one for marksmanship that you should learn to master. And again, if you do the homework and you do the repetitions, it is not natural for me to breathe while I'm shooting. And so just as it was not natural for a lot of people to close one eye when they're shooting, that's great, because if you can shoot with both eyes open, then you should do that. But for me, it was awkward for me to open both eyes because I've done the one eye for so long, and now I've actually got to a point where I can do both. And most of my shooting now is both eyes open and looking at my target, not my sights, and some of those things. So which brings me to our next thing, sights. So you've got sight alignment, which is aligning your front sight post with your rear sight on your slide, right? So on your slide, you have your front sight, and then you have your rear sight. This guy often gets forgot about. I don't know, as soon as we introduce live fire, I think people forget about this guy and they focus on the front sight only. So when you're talking about your sight alignment, it should be equal height, meaning the front and rear sight should be aligned straight across. And then it should be equal light. So it should be centered in that rear sight, like so. So it should be aligned across, and then equal light in between, or equal spacing in between. So if you've got these little circles on your sights, you can make like a little sideways snowman, right, and align that up. Now sight picture, on the other hand, is if this is my center of my target, that's where I want my sights, about center of that silhouette. So that's aligning your front and rear sight. Once you have your sight alignment, you want to superimpose that center mass onto that target, and that's what we call sight picture. Now, your eye can only concentrate on one thing, and we're talking about marksmanship shooting. So ideally, you would want to close your one eye, and ideally, if you're right-handed, you would be right eye dominant, and there's a way that you can check that too. A little test about checking your left and right eye dominant, and it's by simply making a small little circle or triangle with your hands together like so, and then you find a specific spot in the room, such as this heart or something smaller, right, where you can see it. You don't want this too wide, you want it nice and small, and then look at something specific in the room, and then close your left eye. You should still be able to see it. If you close your right eye, again, if you're right-handed, then with your left eye open, you probably won't be able to see that. If it's the opposite for you, that means you're left eye dominant and right-handed shooter. Not a big deal when it comes to handguns, but definitely you're going to want to switch up with rifles, because you're going to want to get your cheek on the right side of that firearm so that you can look at that sight properly. But with regards to handguns, it's not a big deal. You can kind of just cant the gun a little bit. And again, learn to shoot with both eyes open, and that won't be an issue. For defensive shooting, that's what we should be doing, because likely what's going to happen in a critical incident, both eyes are going to be open. You're not going to be looking at any of these guys. You're going to be looking at this, right? This target or this threat. So sights probably won't even come into play. Do they need to? I don't know. Can you take a shot without using your sights at certain distances? Those are things that you're going to have to discover on your own when you're at the range. So I can't tell you if you need to use your sights or if you don't. But what I can tell you is you can practice that. So set your target out there at 3 yards, at 5 yards, 7 yards, right? 15 yards or 15 feet. We'll call it feet. 3 feet, 5 feet, and 15 feet. And know those thresholds. 21 feet is that tooler drill we talk about in classroom. And so what I say that you need to be shooting beyond 21 feet, a little bit, but not much, right? Because some might argue that if you're shooting somebody at 21 feet, you likely have the opportunity to escape and get out of there. And that's probably going to be your best choice, right? So then you don't even have to worry about getting involved in any of this. But nonetheless, you need to know your thresholds. You need to practice all of your basic shooting fundamentals, marksmanship and defensive. So what does defensive look like? Defensive, you think that you're going to get a perfect stance down? Do you think that you're going to be able to close one eye? Do you think your target's going to be squared up on you and stagnant and still targets right sitting there? No, it's not going to be a static target. It's probably going to be somebody moving at you. You might have to eat a slide. What does that mean? You might pull the gun to here and then end up only having to shoot from here, right? You might not be able to get it out to here launched. So all of those things are going to take into play. So if you get to a range that allows you the opportunity to shoot offhanded, try some of that stuff. Can I shoot with just point shooting, right? Do I need to come out like that? Do I, can I shoot offhanded, right? What if I had to take a shot offhanded? Am I able to do some of that? The other thing is you need to get some dry firing and practice in with drawing, depending on how you carry and where you carry. Don't just do the physical, but also do mental, right? Build that muscle memory, build those neural pathways into your long-term memory so that it's there for you to retrieve when, if it hits the shan and the monkey part of your brain kicks in. So once again, we talked about some basic shooting fundamentals. So this is just a very basic shooting lesson. The more you handle and manage recoil with that grip, the better off you're going to be. So learn to master that grip. There's a lot of great videos out there on grip and also on that trigger control. 90% of majority of shooter error is due to the shooter anticipating the recoil of the weapon, or it's also not having that follow through like we talked about. So squeezing that trigger and then letting it go quicker. More so with rifles than with handguns, but nonetheless it's still there. Have that follow through. Be thinking about squeezing that trigger, owning that through the whole process, and then either holding it to the rear and then releasing it until you can formulate that habit of owning that trigger straight through and straight back and forth, back and forth. Master those skills. Those are things you don't even need a firearm to do. You can do in the convenience of your home for free with rubber bands and using some other training devices out there. So again, stay safe. I hope you're enjoying the videos, and peace out.